What if the life you're chasing is actually the life that's exhausting you? In this story, I share how leaving a fast, noisy American city led me to a quiet rural town where something unexpected happened: healing, love, and a slower way of living. If you've ever felt tired, lost, or ready to give up, this real English story might gently remind you that sometimes peace begins the moment you slow down. The day I needed quiet. What if the life you're chasing is actually the life that's exhausting you? In this story, I share how leaving a fast, noisy American city led me to a quiet rural town where something unexpected happened: healing, love, and a slower way of living. If you've ever felt tired, lost, or ready to give up, this real English story might gently remind you that sometimes peace begins the moment you slow down. There was a morning in America when everything felt too loud. Not just the traffic. Not just the phones ringing. Not just the endless emails and schedules. The noise was also inside my head. Thoughts running fast, worries piling up, expectations growing heavier every day. It was the kind of noise that makes your shoulders tight and your breathing shallow. You might know that feeling. Your brain wakes up before your alarm clock. Your heart is already racing before the day even begins. And suddenly, learning something new, like practicing English, feels impossible. Your mind says, "Not today. I'm too tired." That morning, I was sitting in a small apartment in a busy American city. Outside the window, cars rushed past like they were late for something important. Sirens echoed far away. Someone downstairs was arguing loudly. The city was alive, restless, constantly moving. For many people, that energy is exciting. For me, that day, it felt overwhelming. I remember staring at my coffee, now cold. I had planned to practice English that morning. I even had a notebook open on the table. On the first page I had written a simple sentence. "Today I will practice English slowly." But I hadn't written anything else. Because sometimes the hardest part of learning English is not grammar or vocabulary. It's the feeling in your mind when you believe you are too tired, too slow, or too late to improve. Psychologists actually have a name for this kind of feeling. They call it cognitive overload. When your brain receives too many signals, noise, stress, decisions, it becomes harder to learn new information. Your brain starts protecting itself by avoiding effort. In simple words, your brain says, "No more today." That morning, my brain was clearly saying no. But something strange happened. Instead of forcing myself to study harder, I decided to do something very small. Something simple. I closed my laptop. I stepped outside. And I started walking. Not toward work. Not toward a store. Just walking. The streets were crowded. People were moving quickly, eyes focused on their phones or the traffic lights ahead. Everyone looked busy, like their time was extremely valuable. In that moment, I realized something quietly uncomfortable. I looked exactly the same. Always rushing. Always thinking about the next task. Always feeling like I needed to catch up with something invisible. But catch up to what? Sometimes life moves so fast that you don't notice how tired you have become. I kept walking until I reached a small park between two tall buildings. It wasn't a beautiful park. Just a few trees, a couple of wooden benches, and some tired-looking grass. But it was quieter than the streets. I sat down. For the first time that morning, I noticed something simple. Wind moving through leaves. A dog barking somewhere far away. Two birds arguing on a tree branch. The sounds were small, almost invisible compared to the city noise. But my breathing slowly changed. My shoulders relaxed. Something inside my mind became quieter. Neuroscience explains this beautifully. When we step into calmer environments, places with nature or fewer distractions, the brain activates something called the parasympathetic nervous system. That system tells the body it is safe to relax, recover, and learn again. In other words, quiet helps the brain heal. Sitting there, I realized something surprising about learning English. Maybe the problem wasn't that English was too difficult. Maybe the problem was that my life was too fast. When your life moves like a race, your brain doesn't want extra challenges. Even simple listening practice can feel heavy. But when your mind slows down, something interesting happens. Language begins to feel like a conversation instead of a task. I looked around the park again. An older man was feeding birds slowly, tossing tiny pieces of bread. A woman was walking her dog without checking her phone every 10 seconds. Someone nearby was reading a book quietly. Nobody looked rushed. And suddenly a strange thought appeared in my mind. What if life didn't have to be this fast? What if somewhere in America, life moved differently? America is often imagined as big cities, bright lights, busy streets, and endless ambition. But there is another America too. A quieter one. Small towns, long roads, wide skies, and neighbors who actually know each other's names. At that moment, I didn't know much about rural America. But something inside me was curious. What would life feel like in a place where mornings are quiet? Where people walk instead of rush? Where conversations happen slowly on front porches instead of through rushed text messages? The idea sounded almost unrealistic. But it also sounded peaceful. And when your mind is exhausted, peace becomes very attractive. So there I was, sitting on a simple wooden bench in the middle of a busy American city, thinking a thought that would slowly change my entire life. Maybe I didn't need a faster life. Maybe I needed a slower one. At the time, I didn't know that this small moment of quiet would lead me to a rural town, a new kind of community, and even a love story I never expected. I only knew one thing. For the first time in a long while, my mind felt calm enough to listen. And sometimes, that is exactly where healing begins. Leaving the fast city life. Imagine standing in the middle of a busy street where everything moves fast except your thoughts. Cars rush past. Screens glow everywhere. People walk quickly as if time itself is chasing them. Yet inside your mind, something slows down. A quiet question appears and refuses to leave. Is this really the life I want? That question followed me for weeks after that morning in the park. Life in the American city continued exactly the same. The alarm clock rang early. Coffee brewed quickly. Emails arrived faster than I could answer them. Every day looked efficient, productive, organized, and strangely exhausting. You might recognize this rhythm. Wake up. Work. Check messages. Eat quickly. Work again. Scroll on your phone at night. Fall asleep tired but unable to fully rest. Many psychologists call this modern lifestyle constant stimulation. The brain receives information all day long, notifications, conversations, noise, lights, deadlines. At first it feels exciting. But after months or years, the brain quietly becomes overwhelmed. When the brain is overwhelmed, something interesting happens. It stops enjoying the very things that once felt meaningful. Learning English was one of those things for me. At the beginning, practicing English felt exciting. Every new word was a small victory. Every conversation felt like progress. But in the fast city life, English practice slowly turned into another task on a long list. Practice listening for 20 minutes. Read 2 pages. Repeat pronunciation. The problem was not the English itself. The problem was the pressure around it. One evening, after another long day, I opened my notebook again. The same notebook from that morning in the park. The sentence was still there. Today I will practice English slowly. I stared at those words for a long time. Slowly. The word looked simple. But my life didn't feel slow at all. And then another thought appeared, the kind of thought that sounds a little crazy at first. What if I changed my environment instead of forcing my motivation? Scientists who study learning environments often explain something powerful. Our surroundings shape our behavior more than our willpower does. When the environment is calm, the brain naturally focuses better. When the environment is chaotic, concentration becomes harder. So instead of pushing my brain harder, maybe I needed to place it somewhere quieter. Somewhere slower. That night I searched something unusual online. Small towns in rural America. Photos appeared on the screen, long country roads, wooden houses, fields stretching toward the horizon, and skies that looked impossibly wide. Some towns had only a few thousand people. Some had fewer. It looked like a completely different world from the city outside my window. In those places, life followed different rhythms. Morning started with sunlight instead of traffic noise. People greeted each other by name at the grocery store. Neighbors sometimes talked on front porches in the evening. The idea felt peaceful, but also slightly terrifying. Moving to rural America meant leaving the comfort of what I already understood. Even if the city was stressful, it was familiar. I knew the buses, the streets, the coffee shops. Rural towns were unknown territory. And learning English in a small town might be even harder. What if people spoke too quickly? What if they didn't understand my accent? What if I felt even more alone? Our brains are excellent at imagining worst-case scenarios. Psychologists call this the negativity bias. The brain evolved to focus on potential danger, not potential happiness. But another voice inside me was quieter, calmer. It asked a different question. What if the slower life helps you breathe again? That question stayed with me for days. Then one evening something small happened that made the decision clearer. I was walking home from work through the crowded city streets again. The same traffic lights. The same rushing crowds. The same constant noise. Suddenly I noticed something almost funny. No one was looking at the sky. The sunset was beautiful that evening, orange and pink clouds stretching between tall buildings. But everyone's eyes were on phones, sidewalks, or car lights. I stopped walking for a moment and looked up. And I realized I had not looked at the sky properly for a very long time. That tiny moment felt strangely emotional. Because sometimes when life becomes too busy, we stop noticing the simple things that make us feel human. The sky. The wind. The quiet spaces between conversations. Standing there on the sidewalk, I felt the same calm feeling I had felt in the park days earlier. A quiet realization formed in my mind. If I stayed in the city, life would probably continue the same way. Faster schedules. Louder days. Shorter breaths. But somewhere out there, beyond the highways and tall buildings, there were places where mornings were slower and evenings were quieter. Places where learning English might happen naturally through real conversations instead of rushed practice sessions. Places where a person could heal. The decision didn't happen dramatically. No dramatic music. No movie-style moment. Just a simple sentence forming in my mind. I think I need to leave the fast life. Of course, deciding something and actually doing it are two very different things. There were practical questions. Jobs. Housing. Transportation. Community. And the biggest question of all, courage. But something inside me had already changed. Once you realize your life is moving too fast for your soul, it becomes very difficult to pretend everything is fine. And that night, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open again, I began searching not just out of curiosity, but out of intention. Small rural towns. Quiet communities. A slower life somewhere in America. At that moment, I didn't know that this decision would lead me to unexpected friendships, a surprising love story, and a kind of healing I had never planned. I only knew one simple truth. Sometimes the bravest step is not running faster. Sometimes it is choosing to slow down. And that quiet decision was about to change everything. The night I almost quit. The night I almost quit didn't arrive with drama. There was no storm outside, no shouting, no big moment that would make a good movie scene. It came quietly, like a slow leak in a tire. You don't notice it at first, but eventually you realize you can't keep going the same way. I remember sitting alone in my small kitchen. The light above the table flickered every few seconds, like it was tired too. My phone screen glowed in the dark room. A message I had sent earlier still showed the same word beneath it, seen. No reply. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. People get busy. People forget. People have lives. But hours passed. The silence grew louder. I leaned back in the chair and rubbed my eyes. My body felt heavy in that strange way that doesn't come from physical work, but from carrying emotions too long without putting them down. The truth was simple, I was exhausted. Not just from that day. Not just from that week. From trying. Trying to hold things together. Trying to be patient. Trying to believe that effort would eventually lead somewhere better. Sometimes effort does pay off. But sometimes effort feels like shouting into a canyon and only hearing your own voice echo back. That night, I wondered if I had misunderstood everything. Maybe I had tried too hard. Maybe I had believed in something that was never really there. The thoughts didn't arrive all at once. They crept in slowly, like fog filling a valley. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the street was quiet. A few yellow streetlights stretched down the road like small islands of light in a sea of darkness. Somewhere far away, a car passed. For a moment, I imagined what it would feel like to just stop trying. To stop reaching out. To stop hoping. There's a strange kind of peace in that idea. When you expect nothing, nothing can disappoint you. I stayed by the window for a long time, staring at nothing in particular. My mind replayed the past months like short clips from an unfinished film. The conversations. The laughter. The moments that felt real. And then the small cracks that slowly appeared. A cancelled plan here. A delayed message there. A conversation that felt slightly colder than the one before it. None of those things looked big on their own. But together, they formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. Patterns are uncomfortable because once you see them, you can't pretend they're accidents anymore. I returned to the table and sat down again. My phone screen had gone dark. For a moment, I didn't want to touch it. There's a certain fear in checking your phone when you already suspect what you'll find. Nothing. Still, my hand moved almost automatically. The screen lit up. No new messages. I let out a slow breath I didn't realize I was holding. It's strange how a single notification can change your entire mood, yet the absence of one can feel just as powerful. That was the moment the thought came clearly into my mind. Maybe it's time to stop. Not because I was angry. Not because I wanted revenge. But because something inside me felt tired in a deeper way. Like a runner who realizes halfway through the race that they might not have the strength to finish. I leaned forward and rested my elbows on the table. Why am I doing this? I whispered into the empty room. The question didn't have an easy answer. Part of me wanted to keep believing. Part of me wanted to protect myself. Both voices spoke at the same time, and neither one sounded completely right. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. Finally, I picked up the phone again. This time, not to check messages. To open our conversation. I scrolled up slowly, past dozens of messages. There were photos. Jokes. Long late-night conversations about dreams and fears. Reading them felt like opening an old book filled with handwritten notes in the margins. Proof that something real had once existed between those lines. My chest tightened slightly. If everything had been meaningless, quitting would have been easy. But that was the problem. It hadn't been meaningless. Somewhere along the way, something had changed. And neither of us had stopped long enough to talk about it honestly. I stared at the blinking cursor in the message box. The blank space waited patiently. I could type something simple. Are you okay? Or something more honest. Do you still want this? But sending either message meant reopening the door to uncertainty. And uncertainty can be scarier than disappointment. For a moment, my finger hovered over the keyboard. Then I locked the phone and placed it back on the table. Not tonight. Tonight, I needed something else first. I needed quiet. I stood up again and turned off the flickering kitchen light. The room fell into darkness, except for the faint glow from the street outside. Walking to the bedroom felt strangely peaceful. When I lay down, the ceiling above me looked unfamiliar, as if I were seeing it for the first time. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't loud. They happen in silence, in small rooms, late at night, when no one else is watching. That night, I didn't solve anything. I didn't send a message. I didn't make a final decision. But I did something important. I admitted to myself that I was close to giving up. And oddly enough, that honesty brought a small sense of relief. Because pretending to be strong all the time is exhausting. Admitting weakness doesn't mean you've lost. Sometimes it simply means you're human. As sleep slowly pulled me toward the quiet darkness, one final thought crossed my mind. Tomorrow, I would decide what to do next. But tonight, it was enough just to breathe. The message I almost didn't send. Morning arrived quietly, as if the world knew I hadn't slept well and decided not to rush me. Sunlight slipped through the thin curtains and landed softly on the floor. For a few seconds, I just lay there, staring at the pale glow on the wall. My mind felt foggy, like a city waking up after a long night. Then I remembered. The message. Or more accurately, the message I never sent. My phone rested on the small table beside the bed. I didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, I stayed still, listening to the faint sounds outside, someone starting a car, a door closing down the street, a dog barking somewhere far away. Ordinary morning noises. But inside my chest, nothing felt ordinary. I knew the decision I had avoided the night before was still waiting for me. Some choices are like unopened letters. You can place them aside for a while, but eventually curiosity, or courage, forces you to read what's inside. After a few minutes, I reached for the phone. The screen lit up. No new notifications. No message. For a moment, disappointment tried to creep in again. But this time, it didn't feel as sharp as the night before. Maybe because I had already faced the worst possibility in my mind. Or maybe because sleep had given my thoughts just enough distance to breathe. I opened our conversation. The last message I had sent was still there, sitting quietly at the bottom of the screen like a sentence that had been left unfinished. Seen. That single word beneath it looked strangely heavy. I stared at it for a long time. Then I began scrolling upward again. There was something almost hypnotic about reading old conversations. They were snapshots of who we had been at different moments. Here was the first joke that made both of us laugh. Here was the night we stayed up talking about childhood memories. Here was the conversation where everything suddenly felt deeper, more personal. Each message was a reminder that connection doesn't appear overnight. It builds slowly, word by word, moment by moment. Which made the silence now feel even more confusing. I placed the phone down again and sat on the edge of the bed. Maybe the problem wasn't the silence itself. Maybe the problem was the story I kept telling myself about that silence. Our minds are experts at filling empty spaces with assumptions. They don't care anymore. They're losing interest. You were the only one trying. But assumptions aren't facts. They're just guesses wearing confident masks. I stood up and walked toward the kitchen, making coffee in slow, quiet movements. The familiar smell filled the room, grounding me in the present moment. While the coffee cooled slightly in my hands, I looked at the phone again. A simple truth surfaced in my thoughts. Right now, there were only two paths in front of me. One path was silence. I could protect my pride, close the conversation, and slowly let distance do its quiet work. Eventually, time would turn this chapter into a memory. The other path was honesty. Not dramatic honesty. Not emotional speeches. Just simple, clear words. But honesty always carries risk. Because once you say what you truly feel, you can't take it back. I returned to the table and unlocked the phone again. The message box waited patiently. The blinking cursor appeared like a tiny heartbeat on the screen. I began typing. Then stopped. Deleted the words. Started again. The first version sounded too emotional. The second version sounded too cold. The third version sounded like I was pretending nothing mattered. I leaned back and sighed. Why was it so hard to send a few honest sentences? The answer came quietly. Because sending the message meant accepting whatever answer might come back. Or worse, accepting that no answer might come at all. For a moment, fear tried to convince me to close the conversation again. To wait another day. Or another week. But something inside me pushed back. Waiting hadn't made anything clearer. Silence hadn't made anything easier. Eventually, I realized something important. This message wasn't really about changing the other person's behavior. It was about being honest with myself. I looked at the screen again and typed slowly, without overthinking every word. Not a long paragraph. Not a dramatic confession. Just something real. Something simple. Something human. My finger hovered above the send button. I could feel my heart beating slightly faster, which felt almost ridiculous. It was just a message, after all. But sometimes small actions carry the weight of bigger emotions. For a few seconds, I considered closing the app again. No message. No risk. No rejection. But also, no clarity. I exhaled slowly. Then pressed send. The message disappeared from the text box and settled at the bottom of the conversation. Delivered. And just like that, the moment I had spent hours worrying about was over. The world outside didn't change. Cars still passed on the street. The coffee still tasted slightly bitter. The sunlight still moved slowly across the floor. But inside me, something felt lighter. Not because I expected a perfect response. Not because I suddenly felt confident about the future. But because I had stopped hiding behind silence. Sometimes courage isn't loud. Sometimes courage is just pressing send on a message you almost kept to yourself forever. I placed the phone face down on the table and took another sip of coffee. Now there was nothing left to do except wait. And strangely enough, waiting didn't feel as heavy anymore. The day I met her. A strange thing about small towns in America is that life moves slower, but somehow, the important moments arrive faster. That morning felt ordinary. The sky was pale blue, the kind of quiet color you often see in rural America. The road outside my small rented house stretched past open fields, disappearing into rows of tall trees. No traffic noise. No city rush. Just the soft rhythm of a place that had no reason to hurry. If you had asked me that morning what would happen that day, I would have said something boring. Maybe I would study English for a while. Maybe I would take a walk into town. Maybe I would buy groceries and return home. Nothing dramatic. But life has a funny sense of humor. The day you expect nothing is often the day everything begins. That morning I walked into the only small cafe in town. It was a quiet place with wooden tables, warm yellow lights, and the smell of fresh bread floating through the air. The kind of cafe where people don't rush their coffee. In rural America, cafes are not just places to drink coffee. They are small social centers. People talk. People greet each other by name. People ask simple questions like, "How's your morning going?" For someone learning English, this kind of place can feel both exciting and terrifying. Because conversations happen naturally. And when conversations happen naturally, you can't press pause like you can in a video. You must listen. You must respond. You must try. When I opened the cafe door, a small bell rang above my head. A woman behind the counter looked up and smiled. "Morning," she said. Simple word. One syllable. But in real life, even one word can feel like a test when you're learning a language. I smiled back. Morning. Good. First mission completed. But then something unexpected happened. The cafe was almost full. Only one empty seat remained, at a small table near the window. And someone was already sitting there. A woman. She had a book open in front of her and a cup of coffee beside it. Sunlight touched the edge of the table, making the scene look almost like a quiet painting. For a moment, I considered leaving. Yes, really. My brain quickly began its usual performance. What if she tries to talk? What if I don't understand her accent? What if I say something strange? This is the hidden enemy of language learning. Not grammar. Not vocabulary. But the fear of embarrassment. Psychologists call this communication anxiety. Research shows that when people feel nervous about speaking a second language, the brain actually blocks access to words that we already know. It's not that the words disappear. It's that fear temporarily locks the door to them. So in that moment, my brain was doing exactly what many learners experience. It was trying to protect me. But protection sometimes becomes limitation. I took a slow breath and reminded myself of something important. The goal of learning English is not perfection. The goal is connection. So I walked to the table. Excuse me, I said slowly. Is this seat free? She looked up from her book. Her eyes were calm and kind, the kind of eyes that make conversations feel safe. Yes, she said. Of course. Her voice was soft but clear. American English, but slower than what I usually heard in cities. That helped. I sat down, placing my coffee on the table. For a moment, we both returned to our quiet activities. She read her book. I pretended to check my phone. But something interesting happens in small cafes. Silence rarely lasts forever. After a few minutes, she closed her book and looked at me again. Are you new here? She asked. 3 simple words. But they carried the beginning of a story I didn't expect. Yes, I said. Then I added something important for language learners. I'm still practicing my English. Her reaction surprised me. She didn't laugh. She didn't look impatient. She smiled. That's great, she said. You're doing well. Those 4 words had more power than she probably realized. Encouragement changes the brain. When someone supports us during language learning, the brain releases dopamine, the same chemical connected to motivation and reward. That means one kind sentence can actually improve someone's ability to keep learning. We talked slowly. Very slowly. Sometimes I searched for words. Sometimes I paused. Sometimes I used simple sentences like a beginner. But something interesting happened. The conversation didn't break. It flowed. Not perfectly. But naturally. She told me her name. Emily. She had grown up in this small town. She liked quiet places. She liked books. She liked slow mornings. And she laughed easily. I told her why I had moved to rural America. I told her I wanted a slower life. A simpler life. A life where I could heal from the noise and pressure I used to feel in the city. She listened carefully. That kind of listening is rare. Real listening. The kind where someone waits for you to finish speaking before they respond. Time passed quickly. Soon the cafe began to fill with more people. Someone greeted Emily from across the room. "Hey, Em." She waved back. Then she looked at me again. "Do you come here often?" she asked. I smiled. "Sometimes." "Well," she said, standing up and picking up her book, "maybe I'll see you again." Simple sentence. But sometimes simple sentences carry the beginning of something bigger. She walked toward the door. The small bell rang again as she left. And suddenly the cafe felt strangely quieter. I sat there for a moment, finishing my coffee. Thinking. Sometimes life doesn't announce important moments with dramatic music. Sometimes it just places two people at the same table on an ordinary morning. And later, you realize that morning quietly changed everything. I didn't know it yet. But that small conversation in a quiet cafe would slowly become one of the most important chapters of my life. And the funny part? It all started with 3 simple words. "Are you new here?" And suddenly, I was. Conversations that changed everything. Something interesting happens when you live in a small town long enough. People stop being strangers. At first, you are just the new person. The one with a different accent. The one who pauses for a moment before answering simple questions. The one who sometimes says things in slightly unusual ways. But slowly, something shifts. People begin to recognize you. They nod when they see you on the street. They smile when you walk into a store. Someone might even say your name. And when someone says your name in a place that once felt unfamiliar, the world suddenly feels smaller and warmer. A week after meeting Emily in the cafe, I returned to the same place. Not because I expected to see her. At least that's what I told myself. In reality, curiosity is a powerful force. Psychologists explain that curiosity activates the brain's reward system. When we anticipate something interesting, our brain releases dopamine, making us feel motivated to repeat the experience. So maybe I wasn't just returning for coffee. Maybe my brain was quietly hoping for another conversation. The cafe looked exactly the same as before. Warm lights. Wooden tables. Soft music playing in the background. But this time something felt different. Familiarity. And then I saw her. Emily was sitting at the same table near the window, reading another book. For a moment I considered pretending not to notice her. That's a classic strategy when you're unsure how to start a conversation in another language. But she looked up first. Her eyes lit up with recognition. "Well, look who's back," she said with a small smile. I laughed a little. "I like this cafe." That was technically true. But it wasn't the whole truth. She gestured to the empty chair again. "Sit." One word. Friendly and natural. So I sat. And something interesting happened during that second conversation. It was easier. Not perfect. But easier. Language learning research shows something important. The brain learns faster when it practices with the same person repeatedly. Familiar voices, familiar expressions, and familiar conversation styles reduce the mental effort needed to understand speech. In simple terms, your brain becomes more comfortable. That day, Emily spoke slowly without sounding like she was teaching. She asked simple questions. Where are you from? What brought you here? Do you like small towns? And each question opened another small door in the conversation. I noticed something else too. In the city, people often talk quickly, jumping from topic to topic. Conversations sometimes feel like competitions to see who can speak more. But Emily's style was different. She paused. She listened. She allowed silence to exist between sentences. For someone learning English, that kind of rhythm is a gift. Because silence gives the brain time to organize thoughts. During one part of the conversation, I searched for a word I couldn't remember. I pointed to the window where a farmer's truck passed by. In the city, I said slowly, everything feels loud. Busy. Always moving. But here it feels. I stopped. The word disappeared. My brain froze for a moment. That happens to every language learner. The technical term is retrieval failure. The word exists in your memory, but stress blocks access to it temporarily. Emily waited. She didn't interrupt. She didn't finish the sentence for me. She simply waited. That small act of patience allowed my brain to relax. Then the word appeared. Peaceful, I said. She nodded. Yes. That's a good word. Peaceful. That word described more than just the town. It described how our conversations felt. Over the next few weeks, we continued meeting at the cafe. Not every day. But often enough that it became a quiet routine. Sometimes we talked about culture. She explained small-town traditions in America. Community events. Farmers markets. Local festivals. Things I had never experienced before. Other times we talked about language itself. She was curious about the differences between English and my native language. Why certain expressions existed. Why some phrases sounded funny when translated directly. These conversations were surprisingly powerful learning tools. Studies in language acquisition show that storytelling and personal conversation activate multiple areas of the brain simultaneously: memory, emotion, and comprehension. That combination helps words stay in long-term memory. In other words, learning through real conversation is far more effective than memorizing vocabulary lists. And that's exactly what was happening. Without realizing it, my English was improving. Not through textbooks. Not through grammar drills. But through something much more human. Connection. One afternoon Emily asked a question that caught me off guard. Why did you really move here? The word really carried weight. It meant she wasn't asking about surface reasons. She wanted the deeper story. I hesitated. Because honesty sometimes requires vulnerability. But something about our conversations made it easier to open up. I needed a different life, I said slowly. The city made me feel like I was always chasing something. Money. Success. Approval. I looked out the window. And I realized I didn't even know why I was running. She listened carefully. Then she said something simple but thoughtful. Sometimes people move to find opportunity. But sometimes people move to find themselves. That sentence stayed with me for a long time. Because it felt true. Our conversations became longer after that day. More personal. We talked about family. Dreams. Fear. And occasionally about love. Not directly. Not yet. But the subject floated quietly around the edges of our conversations. Like a possibility waiting for the right moment. Weeks turned into months. And one evening, as the sun set outside the cafe window, I noticed something surprising. I wasn't translating English in my head anymore. I was simply listening. Simply speaking. Simply existing in the language. That's one of the most exciting milestones in language learning. The moment when the language stops feeling like a puzzle and starts feeling like a bridge. And strangely enough, that bridge didn't just connect me to English. It connected me to Emily. To the town. To a slower rhythm of life. And maybe, to something deeper that I hadn't fully recognized yet. Because sometimes the most important conversations in life begin with small words. Coffee. Hello. How are you? But over time, those small words slowly build something much larger. A story. A connection. And sometimes, the quiet beginning of love. The slow rhythm of rural life. Cities teach you how to move fast. Rural America teaches you how to notice things. When I first arrived in this small town, the quiet felt almost uncomfortable. My brain had spent years adapting to the rhythm of the city, constant noise, constant schedules, constant urgency. In cities, silence feels strange. In rural places, silence feels normal. At first, that silence made me restless. My mind kept asking the same question many people ask when they leave a fast environment. Am I doing enough? Psychologists call this productivity conditioning. When someone lives in a fast, achievement-focused culture for many years, the brain begins to measure self-worth by activity. Busy equals valuable. Rest equals failure. But rural life quietly challenges that belief. And Emily was the first person who helped me understand that. One afternoon, she invited me for a walk outside town. Just a short walk, she said. In a city, a walk usually means sidewalks, traffic lights, and buildings on every side. But this walk was different. We followed a narrow dirt road that passed through wide open fields. The sky stretched endlessly above us, and the wind moved slowly through tall grass like gentle waves. At first, we didn't talk much. That used to make me uncomfortable. In the past, silence during conversation felt like a mistake. Like something had gone wrong. But Emily walked calmly, hands in her jacket pockets, completely relaxed. After a while she said something simple. Most people think rural life is boring. She looked across the fields. But I think it's just slower. That word again. Slower. Modern psychology actually supports the benefits of slower environments. Studies show that natural landscapes reduce cortisol levels, the hormone connected to stress. Spending time in nature also improves attention, emotional balance, and creativity. In simple terms, quiet environments allow the brain to rest and reset. As we walked, Emily pointed to different parts of the landscape. That's a soybean field, she said. I repeated the word slowly. Soybean. She smiled. You're practicing again. Language learning often works best this way, naturally, inside real experiences. Instead of memorizing vocabulary from a list, the brain connects words to real objects, real places, and real emotions. When you hear the word field while standing in a real field, the memory becomes stronger. That day we talked about small-town life. Emily explained how people in the town often knew each other for years. Families grew up together. Neighbors helped each other during difficult times. In cities, people have more opportunities, she said. But sometimes they also feel more alone. That observation matched something I had been feeling but couldn't explain clearly. In the city, I had always been surrounded by people. Crowded trains. Busy offices. Loud restaurants. Yet strangely, loneliness often existed inside that crowd. Here, in this quiet place, there were fewer people, but the connections felt deeper. Emily stopped walking near a wooden fence that overlooked a small farm. A few horses moved slowly across the field. "Do you ever miss the city?" she asked. The question made me pause. I thought about the lights, the restaurants, the endless activity. Then I thought about something else. The pressure. The constant comparison. The feeling that you must always do more. I miss some things, I said honestly. But I don't miss the feeling of always running. She nodded. That's why I stayed here. Stayed. That word revealed something important about Emily's story. Many young people leave small towns to search for bigger opportunities in cities. But Emily had made a different choice. She had chosen to stay. I tried city life once, she said. Chicago. Her tone carried a small hint of amusement. 3 months was enough. What happened? I asked. She laughed softly. Everything was loud. Everyone was in a hurry. People walked so fast I thought I was late for something even when I wasn't. I laughed too. Because I understood exactly what she meant. The two of us stood there watching the horses for a moment. Then Emily said something that stayed with me. Life isn't always about moving faster. Sometimes it's about moving in the right direction. That sentence felt like a quiet piece of wisdom. For years, I had believed progress meant speed. Faster career growth. Faster success. Faster achievements. But what if progress sometimes means slowing down enough to understand what truly matters? Our walk continued along the road. We talked about many small things. Food. Books. Music. Weather. But something subtle was happening during those conversations. Trust. Psychologists explain that trust grows through repeated positive interactions. Small moments of reliability and honesty slowly build emotional safety between people. And emotional safety allows deeper connections to form. By the time the sun began to lower toward the horizon, the golden light stretched across the fields in a way that made the entire landscape glow. Emily looked at the sky. Best part of the day, she said. In the city, sunsets often hide behind buildings. Here, the sky becomes a giant canvas. We stood there quietly for a moment. No phones. No noise. Just wind moving through the grass and the slow fading light of the evening. And suddenly I realized something. This slower rhythm wasn't empty. It was full of details I had been too busy to notice before. The color of the sky. The sound of distant animals. The feeling of calm conversation without pressure. Maybe rural life wasn't about doing less. Maybe it was about experiencing more. As we walked back toward town, Emily looked at me and asked another unexpected question. So, are you glad you moved here? The answer came faster than I expected. Yes. Not because everything was perfect. Not because life had suddenly become easy. But because something inside me had begun to change. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't chasing a future that always seemed far away. I was learning how to exist in the present. And strangely, that simple change made life feel richer. Of course, I didn't know it yet. But this slower rhythm was doing more than improving my English. It was quietly reshaping my entire life. And the person walking beside me was becoming a very important part of that change. When love grew quietly. Some relationships don't begin with fireworks. They begin with ordinary days. That's something movies rarely show. In films, love usually arrives with dramatic music, sudden realizations, and perfectly timed confessions. But real life often works differently. Real life is quieter. And the connection between Emily and me grew in that quiet way. At first, we were simply two people spending time together in a small town that moved slower than most places in America. Our conversation started with simple topics, weather, work, food, and small stories from daily life. But slowly, something deeper began to appear. Psychologists often explain that strong relationships grow through shared experiences and emotional safety. When two people spend time together without pressure or performance, the brain gradually associates that person with comfort and stability. In simple terms, the heart begins to relax. That was exactly what was happening. One evening, Emily invited me to dinner at her family's house. "It's nothing fancy," she said casually. "Just my parents. Just my parents." Those 3 words might sound simple, but they carried a surprising amount of meaning. Meeting someone's family is rarely a casual step. Still, her relaxed tone made it feel natural, not dramatic. The house was located just outside town, surrounded by wide fields and a long gravel driveway. When we arrived, the sun was setting, casting a warm orange light across the wooden porch. Her father opened the door before we even knocked. "You must be the famous friend," he said with a friendly smile. I laughed nervously. "I hope famous for good reasons." "Emily doesn't bring people here often," he replied, stepping aside to let us in. The inside of the house smelled like home cooking. Something warm and comforting, roasted chicken, herbs, and freshly baked bread. Her mother greeted us in the kitchen. "You're the one learning English through our daughter," she said kindly. "Trying to," I replied. Dinner began with simple conversation. At first, I worried about my English again. Family conversations can move quickly. People interrupt each other, jokes appear suddenly, and stories overlap. But something unexpected happened. Everyone slowed down. Emily's parents spoke clearly and patiently, as if they naturally understood what it feels like to communicate in a second language. "Take your time," her mother said when I searched for a word. That sentence relaxed my brain immediately. Language learning becomes easier when fear disappears. Scientists studying second language acquisition often emphasize something called low-anxiety environments. When learners feel safe and supported, the brain processes new language more effectively. That dinner became one of those environments. We talked about many things. My home country. Emily's childhood. Life in rural America. Her father told a story about getting stuck in a snowstorm years ago while driving a tractor across the farm. The story involved deep snow, a broken engine, and 3 hours of waiting with nothing but a thermos of coffee. "I learned something important that day," he said. What was that? I asked. Nature doesn't care about your schedule. Everyone laughed. But the sentence contained quiet wisdom. In rural places, people often develop a different relationship with time. Weather, seasons, and nature create their own rhythm, and human plans must adjust. After dinner, we stepped outside onto the porch. The night sky stretched above us like a dark ocean filled with stars. In the city, lights hide most of the stars. Here, they felt endless. Emily leaned against the wooden railing. So, that wasn't too scary, right? She asked with a small smile. Your family is very kind, I said. They liked you, she replied casually. I felt my face warm slightly. How do you know? My dad didn't ask you about politics. We both laughed. The air was cool, and the quiet countryside felt peaceful. Crickets made soft sounds in the distance, creating a natural soundtrack to the evening. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Emily said something thoughtful. You know, when you first came here, you seemed very tense. Tense? I asked. Like someone who had been running for a long time. The observation surprised me because it was accurate. Moving to a new country, adapting to a new culture, and trying to rebuild life from the beginning creates a kind of invisible pressure. Even when things go well, the brain stays alert. Always adapting. Always learning. Always trying not to make mistakes. And now? I asked. She looked at me carefully. Now you seem calmer. That comment stayed in my mind. Maybe rural life was slowly changing more than my environment. Maybe it was changing my inner pace as well. Emily continued looking at the sky. You know something funny, she said. What? You came here to improve your English. Yes. But I think America might be teaching you something bigger. I smiled slightly. What do you think it's teaching? She thought for a moment before answering. How to breathe again. That sentence landed gently but deeply. For years, my life had been structured around progress and achievement. Always planning the next step, the next goal, the next improvement. But standing there under the stars, I realized something. Peace had quietly returned to my life. Not dramatic peace. Just simple contentment. And that feeling was connected to many things. The slow rhythm of the town. The kindness of people. The space to think clearly again. And yes, the person standing beside me. Of course, neither of us said anything dramatic that night. No big confessions. No emotional speeches. Real relationships rarely need those moments. Instead, we continued talking about small things. Books we liked. Movies we remembered. Travel places we dreamed about visiting. But underneath those simple conversations, a quiet truth was forming. Trust was growing. Comfort was growing. And something that looked very much like love was beginning to grow as well. The interesting thing about quiet love is that you often don't notice the exact moment it begins. You only realize it later, when you look back. But one thing was becoming clear. This small town in rural America was no longer just a place where I lived. It was becoming a place where my life was slowly unfolding. And the story was only getting started. When challenges returned. Peaceful seasons in life are beautiful. But life has a strange habit of testing us again just when we start feeling comfortable. For a while, everything in my rural American life felt balanced. My English was improving little by little. Work had become more stable. Even the rhythm of small-town life, slow mornings, quiet evenings, familiar faces, felt natural. And of course, Emily had become one of the most important parts of that new life. But real life rarely moves in a straight line. One morning, something small happened that slowly turned into something much bigger. It began with a phone call. I was sitting at my small kitchen table, drinking coffee and reviewing a few English phrases in a notebook. This had become a daily habit. Short practice sessions are one of the most effective ways to improve language skills. Neuroscience shows that frequent repetition over time strengthens memory much more effectively than long, exhausting study sessions. 5 minutes a day. 10 minutes a day. Small effort, repeated consistently. That's how language grows. My phone rang. The number on the screen belonged to my workplace. At first, I assumed it was a routine question. But the voice on the other end sounded different. More serious. "We need to talk about some changes," my manager said. Those words are rarely good news in any country. Changes. Within a few minutes, I learned the situation. The company was reducing hours. Business had slowed down, and several positions were being adjusted. My schedule would become smaller for a while. Not completely gone, but uncertain. Financial uncertainty can trigger immediate stress in the brain. Psychologists explain that the human mind is extremely sensitive to threats involving stability, especially work, housing, and security. Even a small disruption can activate anxiety. When the call ended, I sat quietly at the table. The coffee in my cup had already gone cold. A familiar feeling returned. The same feeling many immigrants experience at some point, the fear that stability can disappear quickly. When you build life in a new country, every piece of progress feels fragile at first. You work hard. You learn the language. You build relationships. And still, sometimes, things shift unexpectedly. Later that afternoon, Emily noticed something immediately. "You're quieter than usual," she said when we met near the town's small grocery store. "Just a long day," I replied. But Emily had a skill that many emotionally intelligent people develop over time. She noticed the difference between words and reality. "What happened?" she asked gently. So I told her. About the phone call. About the schedule change. About the uncertainty. She listened carefully without interrupting. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "That's stressful," she said. The simple acknowledgement helped more than any quick solution. Sometimes people try to fix problems too quickly. But emotional support often begins with something simpler, understanding. "There's something important about small towns," Emily continued. "What's that?" "People help each other." At first, I assumed she was just being kind. But over the next few days, I began to see what she meant. Word travels quickly in small communities. A few friends from town heard about my work situation. One neighbor mentioned a temporary project helping repair fences on a nearby farm. Another person suggested part-time work at a local store. None of these solutions were perfect. But together, they created something powerful. Options. Psychologists often explain that stress decreases dramatically when people feel they have choices. Even small alternatives can restore a sense of control. And slowly, that's what happened. Instead of feeling trapped by the situation, I began exploring different possibilities. One afternoon, while helping a farmer repair part of a wooden fence, I realized something interesting. The work was simple but satisfying. Physical work has a unique effect on the brain. Studies show that moderate physical activity releases endorphins, chemicals that improve mood and reduce stress. The repetitive motion of hammering nails and lifting wooden boards created a quiet rhythm. It also gave my mind space to think. About life. About the future. About Emily. Relationships often become clearer during challenging moments. When life feels easy, emotions can remain hidden. But when problems appear, the strength of connections becomes visible. During that uncertain week, Emily checked on me almost every day. Sometimes with a short message. Sometimes with a simple walk together. One evening we sat on a bench near the small park in town. The sky was turning deep blue as the sun disappeared behind the hills. "I've been thinking about something," Emily said. "What's that?" "You always talk about the future." I nodded. "That's normal," I said. "Everyone worries about the future." "Yes," she agreed. "But sometimes you forget something important." "What?" She looked around the quiet park. "You're already building a life here." Her words surprised me. Because my mind had been focused only on what might go wrong. But Emily was pointing at something different. What already existed. A place to live. Friends in the community. New work possibilities. A relationship that had grown slowly and naturally. Progress doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like small steps that slowly create stability. Emily stood up from the bench. "Come on," she said. "Where are we going?" "I want to show you something." We walked through a short path that led to the edge of town. From there, a wide view of the countryside stretched across the horizon. Lights from a few distant houses glowed softly in the darkness. "This place helped me once too," Emily said quietly. "What do you mean?" "There was a time when I felt completely lost." That was the first time she had hinted at her own difficult past. And suddenly, I realized something important. Everyone has chapters in life where things fall apart. Everyone faces moments of uncertainty. But sometimes those difficult chapters quietly guide us towards something better. Standing there beside Emily, looking out across the peaceful rural landscape, I felt a strange combination of emotions. Uncertainty. Hope. Gratitude. Life was still unpredictable. But something inside me had changed. Instead of feeling alone in the challenge, I felt supported. And that difference makes every challenge easier to face. Of course, neither of us knew it yet. But the weeks ahead would reveal something even more surprising. Because sometimes the hardest moments in life are actually the beginning of the most important turning points. Choosing the slow life. There is a strange moment that happens in life when you suddenly realize you are no longer chasing the same things. It doesn't arrive with fireworks. No dramatic music. No big announcement. Just a quiet realization that your priorities have shifted. For me, that realization arrived on an ordinary morning in rural America. The kind of morning that most people would probably ignore. The sun was barely rising. A thin layer of fog floated above the open fields outside town. The air was cool, and the world moved slowly, as if everything had agreed to start the day gently. I was standing on the porch of my small rented house with a mug of coffee in my hand. Not rushing. Not checking emails. Not worrying about deadlines. Just standing there. And that moment felt unusual. Because there was a time in my life when standing still like that would have felt impossible. Modern life often trains us to move constantly. Big cities reward speed. Success is usually associated with productivity, long hours, constant improvement, and endless ambition. Faster. More efficient. More successful. But psychologists have started noticing something interesting in recent years. Research in behavioral science shows that people who constantly chase productivity often experience higher levels of anxiety and emotional burnout. The brain isn't designed to operate at maximum speed forever. It needs recovery. It needs quiet. It needs moments where nothing urgent is happening. That morning, standing on the porch, I realized something simple but powerful. For the first time in a long time, my mind felt calm. Not perfectly calm, but calmer than before. A few months earlier, that same mind had been filled with constant worry. Work problems. Language mistakes. Fear about the future. The invisible pressure of trying to rebuild life in a new country. And yet now, something had shifted. The town around me was waking up slowly. A pickup truck drove down the quiet road. A farmer across the field was already walking toward a barn. Birds moved through the sky in small groups. None of them looked rushed. Emily once told me something about rural life that I didn't fully understand at the time. People here measure life differently. At first, I thought she meant work schedules. But later I realized she meant something deeper. In many rural communities across America, people still value things that cities sometimes forget. Time with family. Quiet evenings. Long conversations. Moments where nothing productive happens. But something meaningful does. That morning, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Emily. Coffee later, she wrote. Simple. Direct. That was another thing I had started appreciating about her. No drama. No complicated expectations. Just honest moments shared together. We met at the same small cafe in town where we had first talked months earlier. The place hadn't changed much. Same wooden tables. Same soft country music playing quietly in the background. Same friendly owner who greeted everyone like an old friend. Emily arrived wearing a thick sweater, her hair slightly messy from the morning wind. You look thoughtful, she said as she sat down. I've been thinking about something, I admitted. Dangerous activity, she joked. We both smiled. I took a moment before speaking. You know, when we first met, I thought I was only here temporarily. In this town? Yes. Emily nodded slowly. That makes sense. Most people don't imagine their future in small places. But something strange happened, I continued. What? I stopped wanting to leave. The words surprised even me. Because they were true. The fast life I once believed I needed suddenly felt less important. The constant rush. The endless noise. The pressure to always move forward faster than everyone else. Somewhere along the way, those things had lost their power. Instead, other things had become valuable. Quiet evenings. Honest conversations. Simple work that felt meaningful. Emily listened carefully. Then she asked a thoughtful question. Do you know why that happened? I thought about it for a moment. Maybe because life slowed down here. She shook her head gently. No. Then why? Because you slowed down. That answer stayed in my mind. Sometimes we think a place changes our life. But often it's our mindset that changes first. The town hadn't transformed into something magical. It had always been quiet. Always been simple. The real change had happened inside me. Later that afternoon, we took a walk along a small dirt road outside town. The countryside stretched wide and open around us. Golden fields. Long fences. Endless sky. Emily kicked a small rock along the road as we walked. You know something interesting, she said. What? People spend years chasing the idea of a perfect life. That sounds accurate. But sometimes a good life is just a slower one. Psychologists studying happiness often find similar conclusions. Long-term life satisfaction is rarely connected to constant excitement or luxury. Instead, happiness tends to grow from stability, relationships, and a sense of belonging. 3 things that small communities often provide naturally. As we walked, Emily suddenly stopped. What? I asked. She pointed toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to lower in the sky. The entire field had turned golden. It looked like a painting. This, she said quietly. This is why I stayed. I understood exactly what she meant. The slow beauty of ordinary moments. The feeling that life didn't need to be rushed. Standing there beside her, I realized something important. The question was no longer whether rural life was temporary. The real question was whether I had finally discovered the kind of life I actually wanted. Not the fastest life. Not the most impressive life. Just a peaceful one. And sometimes, choosing a slower life is the bravest decision a person can make. Because it means stepping away from the noise of the world. And listening to what your heart has been quietly asking for all along. Love that grew slowly. Some love stories begin with fireworks. Loud music. Fast emotions. Dramatic moments that feel like scenes from a movie. But the most lasting love stories often begin much more quietly. They grow slowly. Almost unnoticed at first. Like a tree that starts as a small seed and quietly becomes strong over time. That's what happened between Emily and me. There was never a dramatic moment where everything suddenly changed. No sudden confession under the rain. No perfect romantic speech. Instead, our relationship grew the same way rural life grows, patiently, naturally, and without pressure. And strangely enough, that made it stronger. Months had passed since the day we first talked in the small cafe. During that time, our routines had slowly become connected. Morning messages. Evening walks. Weekend visits to the farmer's market. Small conversations that stretched into long discussions about life, culture, and dreams. Those moments might sound simple. But psychologists often explain that strong relationships are built on exactly those kinds of ordinary interactions. Research in relationship psychology shows that couples who develop shared routines, small repeated experiences together, often create deeper emotional bonds. It's not always the dramatic events that build love. It's the everyday moments. The coffee together. The quiet car rides. The small jokes that only two people understand. One evening, Emily and I were sitting on the wooden steps outside my house. The sky had already turned dark, and the quiet countryside stretched around us like a peaceful blanket. A soft wind moved through the trees. Emily was telling a story about her childhood growing up in a nearby town. "I used to think this place was boring," she said. "You?" I laughed. "You look surprised. I can't imagine you wanting to leave this place." "Oh, I definitely wanted to leave," she said. "When I was younger, I thought real life only happened in big cities." That sounds familiar. For many people, cities represent opportunity, excitement, possibility, bright lights and big dreams. But over time, some people realize that excitement doesn't always mean happiness. Emily looked up at the stars slowly appearing in the sky. "I moved away for a few years after college," she continued. "Tried the city life." "What happened?" "I learned something interesting." "What?" "Fast life isn't always better life." Her words echoed something I had been feeling myself. The fast world teaches us to chase things constantly. More success. More money. More recognition. But it rarely teaches us how to feel content. Emily turned toward me. "You know what I like about you," she said suddenly. "That sounds dangerous." She smiled. "You're learning how to slow down." "I'm trying." "That's harder than people think." She was right. In modern culture, slowing down can feel uncomfortable at first. The brain becomes used to constant stimulation, phones, notifications, deadlines, schedules. But when that noise fades, something interesting happens. You start noticing the world again. The sound of wind. The color of sunsets. The rhythm of conversations. Simple things that once felt invisible. As our friendship deepened, my English also continued improving. Not because I studied harder, but because I practiced naturally. Language experts often say that conversation is one of the most effective ways to learn a language. When people feel relaxed and emotionally connected, the brain absorbs language more easily. Emily never corrected me in a strict way. Instead, she listened patiently and sometimes repeated sentences naturally. If I made a mistake, she would simply respond with the correct phrasing in her answer. This technique, called natural correction, is widely recommended in language learning research. It allows learners to improve without feeling embarrassed. Over time, my confidence grew. One night, while we were cooking dinner together, something funny happened. I tried to explain a complicated idea in English. Halfway through the sentence, I got stuck. My brain froze between words. Emily watched me struggle for a moment. Then she started laughing. Not in a mean way. Just the kind of laughter that happens when two people feel completely comfortable. "You know what?" she said. "What?" "You speak English exactly like someone who's thinking deeply." That sounds like a polite way to describe confusion. "No," she said. "It means you care about saying the right thing." That comment surprised me. For a long time, I had seen my slow English as a weakness. But Emily saw something different. Effort. Patience. Growth. Sometimes we judge ourselves more harshly than anyone else ever would. Later that evening, we finished dinner and sat at the small kitchen table. The room was quiet except for the sound of dishes being washed in the sink. Emily looked thoughtful. "There's something I want to ask you," she said. "That sounds serious." "A little." I waited. "Do you ever think about the future here?" The question stayed in the air for a moment. Future. It's a powerful word for anyone rebuilding life in a new country. For immigrants especially, the future often feels uncertain for a long time. Work. Legal status. Family. Belonging. All those questions take time to answer. "I think about it sometimes," I said slowly. "And?" "I used to imagine leaving this town eventually." Emily nodded quietly. "And now?" I looked around the small kitchen. The familiar table. The warm light. Emily sitting across from me. The peaceful life slowly forming around us. "Now I'm not so sure," I said. She smiled gently. "Good," she said. "Why good?" "Because I was starting to imagine a future here too." Her words felt simple, but their meaning was powerful. Love doesn't always arrive as a sudden storm. Sometimes it arrives quietly. And one day you realize it has already changed the direction of your life. The slow life. The quiet town. The small daily routines. Somewhere inside all those simple things, something deeper had grown. Not just a new life in America, but a relationship strong enough to become part of that life. And the most surprising part? The biggest chapter of that story hadn't even begun yet. A quiet life, a true home. Strangely, the moment you realize your life has changed forever rarely feels dramatic. No music. No spotlight. Just a quiet understanding that something inside you has settled. For me, that realization came on an ordinary afternoon in rural America. Nothing extraordinary was happening. The town looked the same as always. A few cars moved slowly along the main road. The small grocery store near the corner had its usual handwritten sign outside. Fresh apples, local farm. Life here rarely tried to impress anyone. And that was exactly the point. Months had passed since the evening Emily asked if I could imagine a future here. During that time, something subtle but powerful continued unfolding. The town had slowly stopped feeling temporary. At first, when people move to a new place, especially a new country, everything feels like a waiting period. You tell yourself, this is just for now. Temporary job. Temporary home. Temporary life. But then something unexpected happens. You begin recognizing faces. The cafe owner remembers your usual coffee order. The neighbor waves when you pass by. The local grocery cashier asks how your week is going. Those small moments slowly change the feeling of a place. It stops feeling like somewhere you are passing through, and begins feeling like somewhere you belong. Psychologists often call this community familiarity. Human brains naturally relax when environments become predictable and socially connected. When you know the streets. When people know your name. When daily routines start feeling natural. Your brain slowly shifts from survival mode to comfort mode. And comfort is the foundation of belonging. One Saturday morning, Emily and I visited the town farmers market again. It had become one of our small traditions. Rows of wooden stands filled with fresh vegetables, homemade bread, jars of honey, and flowers grown by local farmers. Children running between tables. Neighbors chatting like old friends. The kind of place where no one seemed rushed. Emily was speaking with a farmer about tomatoes while I stood nearby, listening. Her voice blended naturally with the quiet sounds of the market. At that moment, something interesting happened. A man at the next stand looked at me and nodded. "Morning," he said casually. "Morning," I replied. The conversation lasted less than 2 seconds. But it felt different. Not polite. Not distant. Just normal. And suddenly, I noticed something that surprised me. I was no longer translating English in my head. For a long time after arriving in America, every conversation required mental effort. Listen. Translate. Think of a response. Check the grammar. Then speak. Language learners know that exhausting process well. But standing there in the farmer's market, talking with strangers in simple conversations, something had changed. English was no longer a puzzle. It had become part of my everyday life. Language experts call this language integration. It happens when a new language stops feeling like something you study and begins functioning like something you live. It's one of the most satisfying milestones in language learning. Not perfection. Just comfort. Emily finished talking with the farmer and walked back toward me holding a small basket. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I just realized something." "That sounds serious." "I didn't translate that conversation." Emily looked confused. "What conversation?" "Exactly." She laughed. "That's a good sign." We walked through the market together, stopping at a few more stands. Eventually we sat down at a wooden picnic table near the edge of the field. The sky stretched wide above us. Open. Calm. Peaceful. Emily opened the basket and handed me one of the tomatoes she had bought. "Try it," she said. "Raw? That's how you know it's good." I took a bite. It was surprisingly sweet. "Okay," I admitted. "That's impressive." "Local food advantage," she said proudly. We sat quietly for a moment. Then Emily asked something unexpected. "Do you remember the first time you came to this town?" I nodded. "I thought it was temporary." "And now?" I looked around. The farmer's market. The familiar streets. The quiet rhythm of life. Emily sitting beside me. For a long time, I had believed that finding a home meant discovering the perfect place. The right city. The right opportunity. The right environment. But rural America had taught me something different. Home is not only a place. It's a feeling. A collection of moments where your life begins to feel natural. Where your mind stops fighting the environment. Where the future no longer feels uncertain. Instead, it feels possible. "I think I understand something now," I said. Emily raised an eyebrow. "That sounds mysterious." "I spent years trying to build a life in America. And I didn't notice when that life actually started happening." She smiled. "That's usually how it works. People rarely notice the exact moment their life becomes meaningful. It happens slowly. One friendship. One routine. One quiet afternoon at a time." Later that evening, as the sun began setting over the fields outside town, Emily and I walked along the same quiet road we had visited many times before. The sky turned orange and gold. The world moved slowly, peacefully. And standing there beside her, watching the light fade across the countryside, a simple thought appeared in my mind. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just clear. This life. This quiet town. This slower rhythm. This love growing naturally between two people. This was no longer just a chapter of my story. It was my home. And sometimes the most meaningful homes aren't the ones you search for. They are the ones that slowly grow around you, while you're busy learning how to live. Sometimes the biggest turning point in life doesn't come with applause. It doesn't arrive with fireworks, perfect timing, or a dramatic moment where everything suddenly makes sense. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the middle of an ordinary day. And if you watched this story until the end, you probably realized something important. The journey in this video was never really about a place. It was about a person who almost gave up, and didn't. Someone who walked through loneliness, uncertainty, and silent nights wondering if starting over was a mistake. But step by step, something changed. Not the world. Not the past. But the way they saw themselves. Because the real moment when life begins to shift isn't when everything becomes easy. It's when you realize you are still here, still trying, still willing to move forward even when the path is unclear. And maybe that's why this story resonates with so many people. Some viewers might be watching from a small apartment after a long day of work. Some might be sitting in a quiet room feeling lost about their next step. Some might be wondering if it's too late to rebuild their life, their dream, or their confidence. If that's you, remember this. Every meaningful life story contains chapters where nothing seems to work. Where progress is invisible. Where doubt is louder than hope. But those chapters are not the ending. They are the place where real growth begins. The quiet days. The uncertain steps. The moments when you choose to keep going even when nobody else sees the effort. Those are the moments that slowly rebuild a life. And maybe the most powerful realization of all is this. Home is not always where you started. Sometimes home is the place you become after everything you've been through. A place built from resilience. From courage. From the decision to try one more time. If this story spoke to you today, it might not be an accident. Maybe you needed a reminder that starting over isn't failure. Sometimes it's the bravest decision a person can make. And if you're still watching right now, here's something I'd love to know. What part of this story felt the most real to you? Was it the doubt? The loneliness? Or the moment when everything finally started to make sense? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who is going through the same journey right now. And if you enjoy learning real English through emotional, meaningful stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every week we share new stories designed to help you improve your English listening skills, learn real-life American expressions, and experience powerful stories that stay with you long after the video ends. Because language learning becomes much easier when the story feels real. And trust me, the next story coming to this channel might surprise you even more. A story about a moment when a single decision changed two lives forever, and neither of them expected what happened next. So if you're curious about what comes next, stay with us. Click subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.